Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh and welcome to an all new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode I shall be reviewing the Ki-94-II, a tier 4 battle rating 5.7 Japanese Fighter-Interceptor that was a reward plane for completing the air battles tasks in the Operation Summer 2017 event. As always, starting with the plane's history, we begin thus. With the rising potency of American bomber sorties in the Pacific from 1943 onwards, the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force, the IJAAF, had an increasing need for a high-altitude interceptor that could combat this threat. In response, Tachikawa Hikoki Kabushiki Kaisha, or Tachikawa Aircraft Company Limited, initially proposed a single-seat twin-boom monoplane design under the designation of Ki-94. This aircraft was powered by two 2,200 horsepower Mitsubishi Ha-211 18-cylinder radial engines that were mounted inside a centralised fuselage nacelle with a cockpit situated on top of it. These engines drove a pair of four-bladed propellers mounted in a push-pull configuration. With respect to armament, it was planned that the plane would be armed with two 30mm Ho-155 cannon and two 37mm Ho-204 cannon, all mounted in the wings. However, despite Tachikawa's predictions that the Ki-94's performance would be outstanding for the role of an interceptor, the IJAAF considered these predictions to be unduly optimistic. More so, the IJAAF's doubts were not dispelled when a wooden mock-up was presented in October of 1943. Instead, the IJAAF judged the design to be too complex and requested that the design be scrapped. In response, Tachikawa complied with the IJAAF's request, but did not give up working on a high-altitude interceptor design. Instead, a second Ki-94 design was put forward by a team under the leadership of Tatsuo Hasegawa by the summer of 1945. This design was influenced by the need to counter American B-29 raids on the Japanese homeland and drew heavily from the same development requirements as the Nakajima Ki-87 Fighter-Interceptor. The net result was a more conventional single-seat monoplane fighter-interceptor design powered by a single 2,461 horsepower Nakajima Ha-4412 18-cylinder radial engine as mounted in the nose, which would drive a 6-bladed propeller unit. The cockpit would be pressurised for high-altitude operations, and the plane would be armed with two 20mm Ho-5 cannon and two 30mm Ho-155 cannon, all mounted in the wings. The plane would also have the ability to carry two 250kg or 551 pound bombs as external ordnance if required. When this second design was proposed to the IJAAF, it was approved and assigned the designation of Ki-94-II, leading to the original Ki-94 design being retrospectively designated as the Ki-94-I. An order for 3 prototypes and 18 pre-production aircraft was commissioned. Unfortunately, the end of the war in the Pacific came too soon for the Ki-94-II. By the 15th of August 1945, only 2 prototypes had been built, with the first prototype being readied for its maiden flight, albeit fielding a 4-blade propeller as the 6-blade propeller was not available. As a result, the Ki-94-II was to never take to the skies in any capacity. And so our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the Ki-94-II handles in the skies of War Thunder Arcade. Today's gameplay is brought to you from the ground strike map Grave Robbers Cliffs. For this we'll be using the following setup. Stealth belts are a 20mm cannon, the reason being in my experience the stealth belts are the most powerful out of those on offer and act as a brilliant backup for when you've exhausted the ammunition of your 30mm cannon. For which we're using the tracer belt, which consists solely of high explosive fragmentation tracer shells, absolutely devastating against any given target in the skies, and the tracer means we can quickly see where our rounds are going and adjust when we happen to miss the target of our initial burst. As for our gun convergence, we have it set to 600 metres, this being for the purposes of boom and zoom. We don't want to get closer to a foe than 500 metres before typically breaking off, more on that a little bit later. And therefore the 600 metre gun convergence setting acts as the end point of our boom and zoom pass. If we're going to hit the target, it will be at that point where our convergence is set in order to bring down the foe as quickly as possible. It also works rather well in interception passes all the way out to a distance of 1.5 kilometres on a large wingspan bomber, such as a B-29. And so our fuel load, we're taking the standard fuel load of 30 minutes to ensure we can make it to the end of the game, unscaled on fuel capacity. And starting off with the climb rate of the aircraft as always, in the case of the Ki-94-II as what you're seeing right now, the climb rate of this plane is very strong. Now at its battle rating, it's not got the greatest overall pace. It will not be the first aircraft to get to 5,000 metres altitude. That accolade is going to go to the likes of the Messerschmitt 19G14 and the Spitfire F Mark 22, but only by a small distance of say 250 metres altitude. Where this plane shines in particular, and where it's the best I personally argue, is in climb rate sustainability. You will not find any other plane at the battle rating, in my experience to date, where you can go from a starting altitude of 2,500 metres at a climb angle of 22.5 degrees, balancing things over war emergency power cycles, to an altitude in excess of 7,500 metres in a single climb and still have the capacity to keep on climbing if you so desire. In fact, you can take this plane all the way up to 9,000 metres altitude before it asks you to level out and build up some speed to start again. And this means that if you side climb in particular, or climb over the enemy team in the first instance, you are able to get above and start conducting boom and zoom passes or interception runs on enemy bombers. And here we boom and zoom on the C-205N2. We can see that we're missing the target initially, so we adjust using the trace of the 30mm cannon shells, and we bring them onto target for our first kill, before breaking away once again. Now the difficulty of this plane immediately comes in after that consideration of climb rate sustainability. Because you would think at the point that you're up to say 6,000 metres altitude and the rest of the enemy team are down low, alternatively there's one or two aggressors up on high you may wish to deal with, that it's a case you're in your ideal altitude range and therefore things are all well and good and you can start to play things out. Unfortunately not. Instead you're well below your ideal altitude range, and we'll come back to that after this boom and zoom pass. Here we dive down the IL-2M and we're going to demonstrate the powerful controllability of the Ki-94-II in a high speed dive, and we'll come on to the actual statistics and whatnot a little bit later. And we're going to carve our way around at this point to bring down the Heinkel 177A5 bomber, demonstrating the firepower at our fingertips and the fact that regardless of whether a bomber is up high or down low, you can cut them to pieces. You are an ample threat to their existence. But now switching back to the altitude problem. So I've said that when you're up to say 7,000 metres altitude, you're still outside of your ideal altitude range, whereas a good number of your opposition will be well within their ideal altitude range or at the top point. Most planes at a battle rating of 5.7 in my experience will have an ideal altitude range of somewhere between say 3,000 and 7,000 metres altitude. The ideal altitude range for the engine of this plane in particular is 8,500 to 10,000 metres altitude, and the only map you're going to trigger that is on the Guiana Highlands map, where everybody spawns in at a much higher altitude and the combat is forced to occur at higher altitudes unless you dive down in the first instance. This means that in your typical arcade match, particularly in say an airfield domination game, you are not going to be flying this plane anywhere near the ideal altitude range, and therefore we have to revise it for the purposes of the average game. We would say 5,000 to 7,000 metres altitude, with the disclaimer, note you are flying this plane outside of its comfort zone. And that's because from 8,500 to 10,000 metres altitude, this plane will start to build up speed nicely, and that is reflected in the straight line acceleration thresholds, of which there are 3 in this plane, another unique trait. I have not seen this in any other propeller driven plane in War Thunder to date. From ground level up to 4,000 metres altitude, you'll find that you'll go from your stall speed of 155 km an hour, which is rather low for the size of the plane, and this gives it the ability to literally prop hang very well. You can go from your stall speed to 450 km an hour on engine power alone at an average rate. War emergency power will kick this threshold up to 550 km an hour rather rapidly, but then there is a massive drop off in acceleration. From 4,000 to 8,500 metres altitude, you can go up to 550 km an hour at an average rate on engine power alone. Then with war emergency power, you can only take the plane up to 625 km an hour at a gradual rate, and then there is a significant drop off in acceleration once again. Meanwhile, from 8,500 to 12,000 metres altitude on engine power alone, you will get this plane to go up to 625 km an hour at an average rate, and with war emergency power you can only push this 25 km an hour further to 650 km an hour before you experience a cliff in acceleration and the drop off as described previously. Now this immediately must be kicking alarm bells off in the minds of a number of you watching this video in thinking that this sounds like a very slow plane, despite the stat card as you saw at the start of this gameplay stating that the top speed of this aircraft at 12,000 metres altitude is in excess of 750 km an hour. You can get there, but it takes an excruciating amount of time. And one thing to consider is, you are not triggering the second stage of the plane's supercharger until you use war emergency power at 12,650 metres. That means that this plane is not performing at its maximum capacity until you head to a stupendous altitude at which to trigger that maximum capacity, which you're not going to see in the average game. So instead you have to play outside of the ideal conditions of the aircraft as we dive down these 2 bombers. And what these parts in these 2 bombers actually represent is not just the strength of this plane to intercept bombers and handle itself very well in a high speed dive, but also the fact that at times you are going to be at the mercy of your teammates in deciding whether they want to be the first people to intercept the bombers before you can get there. because planes such as the LA-9, the Spitfire F Mark 22 and the Messerschmitt 19 G10 all have the better acceleration thresholds and the better overall top speeds at the low to mid to high altitude ranges, whereas you are going to start to achieve that dominance only at the most extreme altitude ranges and with a lot of time on your side. So that's something definitely to keep in mind. You are relatively slow to your opposition, and this does carry through in other characteristics as well. Dive speed is another one. Your dive speed acceleration is average at best, which is not a problem. What it means is that if you're chasing after someone in a dive, you'll typically find that you're not going to catch them, but you can stay hot on their 6, and the reverse is that if you try to dive away from someone, such as a Messerschmitt 19 G10, they're not going to gain on you, but at the same time they're still going to be on your 6 at the same distance as before, with some slight variation. However, there is a massive cliff in dive speed acceleration for this plane at 890 km an hour, and that tails in with the maximum dive speed of this aircraft, 901 km an hour, which is below average, as most planes that are battle rating of 5.7, in my experience, can hit dive speeds in excess of 950 km an hour at least. And in turn, what this means is that if you're in the most extreme scenario where you need to dive for maximum speed, going from say 7,000 meters altitude, and the Tango on your 6 is not going to let off, they will eventually catch you. And that makes it very awkward for you, because as you go to lower and lower altitudes, you're actually pushing this plane into a domain where it's going to struggle. Now where it's not going to struggle is prop hanging on the engine, as we're now seeing, to go after an enemy bomber, because you have very strong engine power and very strong energy retention in the vertical, whereby if you come out of a boom and zoom pass at a 30-degree angle of climb, you'll find that you're able to retain all of the energy that you spent in your boom and zoom pass, i.e. the potential to kinetic energy conversion, and return to your position over a 1,500 meter boom and zoom dive on the engine power alone. With more emergency power, you can kick this up to 2,000 meters, which is a very strong case for this plane's boom and zoom capabilities. Now, coming back to what we're talking about, when you go to the lower altitudes, you're pushing against the strengths of this plane, i.e. the engine is being made to operate outside of the ideal altitude range, well outside of it, and below 2,000 meters in particular, you'll see that the overall straight line acceleration of this plane and its climb rate suffer immensely, and that's the last place you want to be caught out. Below 2,000 meters altitude with someone hot on your 6, because whilst you have decent straight line energy retention, when you come out of a dive into a straight line, you'll be able to hold your speed around the 600 km an hour mark with a little bit more emergency power applied. A lot of planes can also do this, if not better, and it means they'll start to catch up to you, and they're going to force you into a turn fight, which is not what you want, because the turn circle of this plane is very wide for a fighter technically. By comparison with, say, the Griffon Spitfires, the Messerschmitt 19s, you'll be outturned easily. The only planes that you're going to be matching the turn circles of are the likes of the P-47N, the Focke-Wulf 190Ds, and the TA-152H and Cs, which will slightly outturn over an extended turn fight when the speeds are going lower and lower, i.e. below 400 km an hour. But even then, the control surfaces of this plane, because they're being forced to act outside the ideal speed range of 500 to 600 km an hour, start to become heavy once again. More on that in a bit in terms of their actual responsiveness. Now the point is, when you go into those turn fights, you're going to be outclassed so significantly that turn fighting is going to take you to pieces. And the ideal thing you want to do is, if you see someone coming in hot on your 6 with a bit of speed, you want to use the superb roll rate of this plane in order to force them to overshoot via a set of scissors and fall into your gun sight, or to the point that they decide to break away and you live to fight another day. The return is, if you've got someone on your 6 above you, you can use the very strong vertical energy retention of this plane and its engine power to conduct a yo-yo, i.e. dive down and then zoom back up towards them, coming up underneath them and trying to shoot them down as they try to climb above you or force you to stall out. Now the return of this is that the control surfaces within their ideal speed range of 500 to 600 km an hour map out that the roll rate is the best aspect of this plane. You'll roll very quickly, amongst the best at your battle rating. Whereas with regards to the rudder, you've got a rather average rudder with a wide flat rudder turn circle, and on top of that the elevator is average in its responsiveness but very heavy once it's been triggered, and that means that your loop circle is extensive and costs you a lot of speed to loop the aircraft. On top of that, if you start a loop below 400 km an hour, you are going to struggle to finish that loop. You'll probably hit your stall speed. Now the upshot is, in a high speed dive, what you'll find, such as right now, is that the control surfaces retain most of their capabilities in the high speed dive. You only lose 10% of your roll rate between 800 and 850 km an hour, which is not noticeable really in the extent of things. As for your rudder, you'll find that between 600 and 750 km an hour, you will lose 50% of your rudder's performance, but not to the point that you lose the ability to be precise in where you're placing your shots, as you're seeing here as we roll over the top onto the G55 and set them on fire, and we carry our momentum through to go after the Hellcat. And as for your elevator, there is no lockup threshold at high speed, which means you get full control of the elevator as before, and it means that you can pull out those tires rather nicely or follow the target. so a little bit of target anticipation, you'll be able to track a target and rip them apart as we pick up the double strike there to wrap up our kills for this game. The final point around controls is the maximum altitude limit for your control surfaces is 10,000 meters in my experience. Then you'll hit a massive heaviness across all 3 control surface domains, but you'll rarely see that for the reasons described before. And with the game concluding, let's go take a look at the post-game stats. I primarily used our Ki-94-II for boom and zoom. With the occasional interception pass in this match, we can see that we scored 8 kills and a single assist, allowing us to profit with 37,087 silver credits and 4,444 research points. When facing the Ki-94-II in a one-on-one engagement, I would recommend a single approach to defeating this aircraft. Lure it into a turn fight. Reason being, the Ki-94-II has one of the widest turn circles for a fighter-interceptor aircraft at its battle rating. When you add in its relatively poor energy retention in the horizontal, something we didn't cover in the gameplay, the Ki-94-II will struggle to keep the plane within its ideal speed range of 500 to 600 km an hour unless it immediately dives away from the engagement. And what you'll find is this plane will bleed its speed away until it gets to 300 km an hour in a standard turn, at which point the plane stabilises through the engine power that it has available to it. If it decides to commit to the turn fight, then the advantage will rapidly shift in your favour, as the plane's manoeuvrability falls away considerably below 400 km an hour, with the elevator and rudder control surfaces starting to feel heavier than before in particular. You can force this need for the Ki-94-II to commit to the turn fight by engaging it below 4,000 meters altitude, as its average dive speed acceleration, below average maximum dive speed, and poor pace at low to medium altitudes takes away the ability for the Ki-94-II to escape from its pursuers. This is especially the case below 2,000 meters altitude, as previously mentioned, where its engine performance suffers heavily, making the aircraft very susceptible to being called out in airfield domination matches, where the average engagement altitude is typically lower than the other game modes in my experience. However, do be wary that when you're coming onto the Ki-94-II-6 at a higher speed, i.e. in excess of 500 km an hour, the Ki-94-II pilot may try to use its great roll rate to force you to overshoot via a set of scissors. Additionally, as a last resort, the Ki-94-II may attempt to use its outright engine power in a climbing spiral to cause you to stall out in its way. And this is important because, as highlighted earlier on, the stall speed of this plane is rather low for its battle rating, 155 km an hour, and the stall recovery is a very easy one to achieve in the fact you just need to gently nose the plane down to a level position, build its speed up to 225 km an hour, and you're ready to go again. Something rather unique to this plane compared to a lot of the other aircraft at its battle rating. To wrap up, let's first recap the strengths and weaknesses of the Ki-94-II. Its main strengths are, firstly, tons of firepower, in that the combination of 20mm and 30mm cannon allows you to down aircraft very quickly, with a very high muzzle velocity on the 30mm cannon, the high explosive fragmentation tracer rounds, and a muzzle velocity of 920 meters per second, allowing you to get the most out of your highest caliber armament. Conversely, the muzzle velocity on average for your 20mm cannon shells is in the region of 725 meters per second, which means you're actually unable to undercut your 30mm cannon shells through the application of your 20mm cannon, if you do not provide sufficient lead to the target. But if you have a habit of giving too much lead, that's where you may find your 20mm cannon shells are going to get the job done. Again, this is something rather different with this plane, compared to the typical trait of machine guns or the lower caliber armament on other aircraft at a battle rating of 5.7, if there is a mixture on said aircraft, having the greater muzzle velocity, and then the larger calibers having the lower muzzle velocity. Also, don't forget to add in the fact that you've got a plentiful supply of ammunition, and you find reloads come at a time of your choosing. The second strength is that this plane thrives at extreme altitudes. Whereas most of your opponents may start to feel a slight pinch in their engine performance at 6,000 meters altitude, the Ki-94-II's engine is only just getting started. Combine this with a highly consistent, strong climb rate, and no bomber will be safe even at the highest of altitudes. And finally, great boom and zoom potential. The Ki-94-II's control surfaces as a whole suffering a light lockup penalty in high-speed dives, in excess of 750 km an hour, you have the capability to guide this plane onto a target with a high level of precision. Add in the plane's strong vertical energy retention, and you should have no problem zoom climbing back up to altitude. As for the plane's key weaknesses, firstly it struggles at standard altitudes. From 8,500 meters downwards, the overall pace of the Ki-94-II will start to feel as though it is falling behind its battle rating contemporaries. This especially becomes the case below 6,000 meters altitude, where you will be reliant on war emergency power to push your straight line speed above 600 km an hour, this taking a considerable time period in itself. Secondly, poor turn fighting capability. With its wide turn circle, poor horizontal energy retention, and increased control heaviness below 400 km an hour, the Ki-94-II can become easy pickings in a standard turn fight for most of its opponents, more so if the plane is forced to fight below 2,000 meters altitude where its engine performance really suffers. As for my final opinion on the aircraft, the Ki-94-II is a potent fighter-interceptor which embodies the concept of high-altitude interception to an extreme at the cost of the plane's dogfighting capabilities. Unfortunately, with engagements at its battle rating typically occurring no higher than 7,000 meters, you'll be regularly forced to fly the plane outside of its comfort zone. This causes the plane to feel out of touch compared to many of its rivals, one in particular the LA-9, who can fulfill the interceptor role just as well, but at the same time demonstrate prowess when used as a dedicated fighter. With that, that's all I've got time for today. For my next review in 2 weeks' time, due to go live on Sunday the 4th of November 2018, I intend to review either the Messerschmitt 19G2 Trop, a Tier 3 battle rating 5.0 German fighter aircraft, or alternatively the Pe-3 Early, a Tier 2 battle rating 2.0 Soviet heavy fighter. Which of these two aircraft I review is entirely up to you, the viewer. You can cast your vote by using the hyperlink in the description of this video, and polling will close at 1200 BST on Sunday the 28th of October 2018. But as always, I've been TX141. If you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.